Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Valenza-Shin, and I welcome you to the beginning of our summer webinar series on comprehensive job search, soup to nuts, as we like to call it informally. Let me share my screen and we'll look at be a little bit more formal. Great. So everyone needs to be muted, but it sounds like there's somebody on the call who has a who doesn't have their muting on, and it's okay. Excellent. So as I mentioned, I'm Christine Valenza-Shin. I am an alumna of the college, class of '84. I saw a couple of my fellow classmates in the registration list. So welcome to everybody, but especially my classmates. I'm the Associate Dean for Beyond Barnard, which depending on when you were here at Barnard, you might be more familiar with as the Office of Career Services or Barnard Career Development. But Beyond Barnard was launched in 2018 and sort of a reorganization and rethinking of career services and some other facets. And so 3 years later, here we are and doing much of the same things that we did earlier, but some new things as well. But one thing that hasn't changed is that Barnard has always offered career support to its alumni, lifetime free career support, and doing these programs as part of it. So welcome to everybody. And this alumni series is part of Beyond Barnard Summer Colloquium. This is something we launched last summer in the midst of the COVID pandemic and all its attendant issues. And we decided that we're in a lot less dire circumstances overall. We decided to rerun it here in summer 2021. And the idea is to, have a place during the summer when a lot of people are regrouping and, it's a time of year a lot of people think about what's next. And so it's a series of events and conversations around work and graduate school and general plans for the future. Oops. It is summer. We started doing this last year again in the midst of a very stressful time. There's studies that show even if you can't get outside and into nature, which is ideal for stress reduction, that even looking at pictures of nature is relaxing it. And so it helps remind me as the speaker to take a breath as we head into the session, and all of you as well, because talking about jobs and career changes and the like can be stressful. So summer images for everyone. But on to business. Let's take a look at what we're going to talk about today, starting with sort of the big picture, a little bit of a few thoughts on where we are now, a year plus down the COVID road, and also just the bigger life picture of where you might be and what you might be thinking about. We'll talk about exploring options, taking a little bit of time before we get into the nuts and bolts to talk about taking a moment to explore. And then we'll get to the practical, what are some of the things you need to have gathered together as you either contemplate a job search, or maybe you're right at the start of it, or perhaps you've already started it, but this will be a good sort of checklist to make sure that you've got what you need. And then, part of the goal for today is to set the rest of the series in context. The rest of the series is going to dive into specific topics around job search. And so we want to look at it kind of a big picture. How do you organize yourself? How can you conceptualize how you're going to go about this? And then some thoughts on tracking your progress. It's a busy process and you want to make sure you don't lose track of details. And then finally coming back out to a little bit of a big picture. As I mentioned, looking for a new job, thinking about a career change or shift can be stressful. And how can you keep perspective? How can you make it manageable, whether you're currently employed full-time, part-time, or perhaps not working at all? How can you sort of adapt yourself and your schedule to those various things? So specifically, we are the yellow highlighter, we're gonna start with the big picture. picture. So I wasn't sure what to title this slide. It changed differently from when we were in the midst of everything, but cautious optimism seemed to be a decent place. There are some really strong economic indicators out there, but a lot of continued uncertainty. So I'm sure most of us, if we've been listening to the news, have heard about, there are a lot of job vacancies. A lot of them are in the sectors that got hit the hardest during the pandemic, the service industry, restaurants, travel, etc. But multiple sectors are starting to open up more. And I think in general, there's what we call employer confidence, so from a big nonprofit to a small startup to, mid-size private sector, public sector. In general, there's a feeling of more confidence, enough certainty that people are beginning to post jobs and hire. Some both official and unofficial hiring freezes have been lifted. So for a variety of reasons, there's a lot of vacancies out there. And in general, there's a lot of movement in the workplace, which it's sort of a double-edged sword. It can make it good for an individual person searching for a job because there's a lot of movement. I just read an article the other day about sort of the pent-up desire to leave a job, and people were uncomfortable doing that during the pandemic and are now themselves feeling more confident about finding something else. So there's a lot of movement on that side. I guess the downside of it might be that there's competition out there. But I think there's enough movement, there's enough growth going on that we're hearing, at least anecdotally, that a lot of people are getting interviews, offers. There's a lot going on out there. So things are not as stuck as some people felt last summer. A lot of people felt. And in general, the stats are showing that college graduates still have an edge when it comes to, being employed, and everybody's jobs were impacted during COVID, but in general, college graduates and the type of jobs and professions that college graduates are in suffered less. So as college graduates, that's, good news for you. Obviously not bad, not good news for everyone. There was a general trend pre-COVID, I'd say in the 5 to 10 years leading up to it, of job searches taking a longer time. Just there tend to be more steps, and the cautious optimism there is to not be overly anxious about things taking a long time in terms of evaluating success or how you're doing. So can't take away your anxiety in terms of financial pressures and other factors that make it so difficult to be, going through the job hunt process. But in terms of keeping things in perspective and taking it personally, it's just can be helpful to know that it's a process. It takes a long time, and part of what we'll look at today is how you can sort of keep yourself going through the process. Just a couple of observations, from on the ground here beyond Barnard, sort of, just good news here. We do a first destination survey every year. We launch it at graduation and keep it open until November. We have heard from 27% of the class of 2021 so far. That's 182 graduates. And 72% of those who've responded are either employed or they are either starting graduate school or will start graduate school in the fall. So the piece of good news there is that we compared this to exactly where we were last year, and that's 10% higher. So I think that speaks to the fact that, this time last year, there were a lot of hiring freezes, a lot of postponements of internships and starting classes. So, and then just to keep it in general perspective, one of the things that we found from last year was that by the time the first destination survey closed in November 2020, despite people's, sort of fears, that figure, the percentage of Barnard graduates either employed or in graduate school, was really down only slightly. We tend to hover in the low 90s by November each year, and last year's were in the high 80s. So it was definitely off a bit, but not as much as people had thought. And then the other thing we're seeing, just both anecdotally and data-wise, is that Handshake, which is our hiring platform, primarily aimed at students and recent grads, although there's some more experienced hiring options there as well. Definitely, the job and internship postings have been picking up since March. I think since things started to stabilize and vaccines began to be rolled out, we've seen a big increase. But it's also caused this interesting delay. So one of the things we've been reassuring students and recent grads on a lot is that unlike most summers where things can kind of slow down in the summer, I think, again, this sort of pent up demand is causing it to be a somewhat unusual summer and for there to be more activity than there often is. It's early days yet. We haven't reached the end of June, and the dog days of July and August could still be slow. But in general, we're feeling relatively optimistic here and for our students and for our alumni. So. And just some thoughts, some sort of overall points that, it's been a crazy year. Nobody can deny it. It's been a very, very difficult year on all sorts of fronts, but no single year career-wise is going to define you. And that's obviously particularly in the context of COVID. It's easy to feel alone in that and to worry about your resume and gaps on your resume and being laid off or furloughed or anything else that's been really difficult employment wise, or making decisions to step back due to childcare or other family care issues. It's really easy to feel that it's to just focus on your own situation, but everyone has gone through this, and in the long term, even in the short term, most people will understand the impact that COVID had on everybody's choices, everybody's employment. And so you can take some comfort in the amount of company you have in the difficult. And I think our big message, whether it's to students or to recent grads or to alumni, of all years, is that it's important in this moment to take some time to reflect, think about your transition. And again, the media is reporting that a lot of people, one of the impacts of COVID has been for people to think about work and what's important to them, both the remote and in office, that issue itself, as well as other factors. So things dinging around me. All right, so back to our agenda. I want to look a little bit about now looking at options and clarifying goals. So this is something I find myself saying a lot to people individually and in these sessions, which is that whether your job search is voluntary or not, you absolutely have to get out, or you've been fired or laid off, or your company is going away, or if you have in fact chosen to move on, do something different, seek a different job. Regardless of the reasons that you're job searching, it's always an opportunity to step back and take at least a little bit of time to think about what do you want to do next. And this is our career exploration process. We use this with students, we use it with alumni, sort of a three-part system. So first, it's a quick or longer look inward, right? Self-assessment. And this sounds simplistic, but it's a really powerful question, and it's one that I very often ask when working individually with alumni is, tell me about your current work, or tell me about your most recent work. What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? Simple pros and cons. And then looking at it through a skills perspective, what do I most like doing? What motivates me? What, when I do this task, when I do this type of project, it gets me excited. I don't drag my heels. But on the other hand, what are the things that really burn me out? They just take more effort. They come less naturally, and taking a look at that. And what percentage of your day is spent doing the things you most like doing, the things you're best at? What percentage of your day is spent on burnout skills, things that come, less easily? And then thinking about work situations in general, this often comes up as culture, but values in general, what's important to you? Everything from mission to salary to commute to just general atmosphere, how success is measured. It's this big picture. And then, thinking again, it's sort of related to the second bullet, but what do you bring? What do you bring what are you going to bring to your next employer, to your next opportunity, to your own business? Should you be contemplating opening your own business, right? And really being able to articulate that. So a lot of this could be done, like any other internal dialogue. This could be any other dialogue. It could be with yourself. It could be in writing. It could be with a close friend or a mentor. It could be with myself or another advisor here at Beyond Barnard. It could be with a career coach, whatever works. But you want to take some time to answer some of these questions and start to articulate, what is it you're looking for in your next opportunity. There's also assessment tools, and we offer a couple here through Beyond Barnard. The main two things we look at is for personality, we use the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and we also use the strong interest inventory, which focuses on interests and sort of motivation. Those are both formal assessment tools. We share them with you. You take them online, and then you have an appointment to go over the results. And they can be helpful. They're not, we often talk about them being, they're not always revelatory. They don't necessarily show you some magical new thing you should be doing or should have been doing all along, but they can suggest some interesting things, and they can also be affirmative of some things you already know about yourself that help you to articulate that. There are the other two sort of key factors in looking at career fit is values and skills. We have a couple of recommendations. Those are external sites, but we can also go over those results with you as well. So that's the looking inward part. And then actually those assessment tools, the next phase of them is to look outward and just to do some job and career research. And, this, again, it's the simple question you're trying to answer here is what's out there? What's out there now, who's hiring now, what skill sets are in demand, and what's out there that could be a good fit for me? Is it the same thing I've been doing? Is it a variation on what I've been doing? Do I want to take a turn and work someplace smaller or start my own enterprise? What are the options? And there's a couple different resources. The ONET is a Department of Labor resource that has information on, it's a compendium of all sorts of job titles. A lot of states have something called Career Zone. So in New York, it's like careerzone.newyork.net. But I noticed that it's in others. Areas as well. And then job sites themselves are a source of information. If you can look at it sort of less from the point of view of what am I going to apply to, and more holistically in terms of, what's out there, what roles, what titles are people hiring for, what skill sets are they looking for. So, and then you obviously can come offline and do informational networking with actual people, and the goal here is to find people who are doing things you'd like to be doing, working places you'd like to be working, and setting up some time to, just gather information and have a conversation about, what things are like, where they work, and in the sector they're in the role they're in. So you've looked inward, you looked outward, and then the goal of all this exploration is to choose some goals and to think about making this real, so away from the dreaming. It's not so much dreaming, but it's like looking big picture, what would I like to do? What would be a good fit for me? And then how do we make this, more realistic and actually make this happen? So it's looking at the timing, it's looking at your finances, and it's looking at specific strategies to have a successful job search. So then let's look at preparing your job search toolbox. And I'm just going to check the time, make sure that we're relatively on schedule here. So job search toolkit, what do you want to gather? What do you want to have in place before you really launch an active job search where you're actively applying to a number of things on a regular basis, and we'll have a lot going on. So clearly you want to update your resume and your LinkedIn profile, or create a profile if you don't have one yet. And you want to at least begin thinking about cover letters. I'm not a big fan of rote cover letters, so you don't want to have one standard cover letter. When we talk about that in a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about how to customize it without driving yourself completely crazy. But it's good to at least start thinking about cover letters, maybe pull up some old ones, or maybe just have a draft of a new one, you know. I'm not going to go into those in a lot detail because those sessions are coming up over the next 3 weeks on each of these job documents or, you know, ways of presenting yourself. But they're definitely part of what you want to be gathering together and starting to look at. I know that can be nerve-wracking for some people to pull up the resume from before and think about how you're going to update it and manage different things. But we will walk you through that over the next couple of weeks for those of you who are struggling with that part of it. I do want to touch on a couple of other things, which is a 30-second networking pitch or introduction, professional references, and a support network. So the 30-second pitch, this sort of got named back, I don't know, probably in the 80s as the elevator pitch. The idea is, can you quickly summarize who you are, what you do, what you're looking for in the space of an elevator ride? But it can be used in a lot of different contexts. It's sort of a declaration of intent, a statement of purpose. It's basically, can you condense a very brief narrative of, you know, obviously basic introductory stuff, you know, whether it's just your name, but what are you currently doing, or what did you most recently do, or what's your background? And then the most important part of it is, what are you looking for? And that's the key thing, is thinking about how can I concisely convey to somebody who, you know, what I'm looking for, because of course, in these situations, you want to be able to, in a networking situation, you want people to be able to help you and say, oh, you know, I know somebody who does that, etc. So variations on this could show up, you know, when you reach out to people on LinkedIn. Obviously, it could be used at a networking event or in informal networking. And then, little typo there, Questy, I like that. Answer to it, and this is also an expanded version of your 30-second pitch, could be the opening, you know, when somebody says, well, tell us about yourself, or, you know, whatever that opening gambit is in an interview. So lots of places to use the 30-second pitch. When we'll touch on some of this stuff in the session on networking and the session on interviewing, we'll talk some more about how to develop and prepare, you know, some of this. So in general, you want to practice this a lot. It's worth pointing out that it's not that often that you're just going to present your 30-second pitch. It's most often going to be a conversation, especially in a whether it's an in-person or online kind of interactive situation. Someone's going to ask you, you know, you're going to introduce yourself, and then somebody's going to say, what do you do? And then, you know, and so you don't, it's not like you're giving a speech, but you're in conversation. But it can be helpful, especially if you find yourself, you know, adding a lot of extra detail or getting nervous about this, to record it. So easy to do on our smartphones if you have one, and to listen. It's not always easy to listen back, but the technology is easy. And then keep revising it, try it out for real, and, you know, as you sort of share it with more people and use it in conversation, you know, just keep an eye on what seems to be working and what doesn't, and revise accordingly. And then I wanted to say a couple things about professional references, because that can be something another thing very helpful to gather here at the beginning of the job search process. So just want to make this distinction between references and then employment history and former managers, which is typically asked for usually at a later stage for a background check by HR when you get to the sort of later stages of the interview and the job process. So you're thinking about people you can choose. You want them to be able to speak honestly, but also primarily positively. And, you know, there's a list of people, you know, here you can think about. Former managers, colleagues, in some cases, depending on where you're at in the hierarchy, even having for an employee, you know, somebody who you supervised, you know, can also be a decent reference. Aim for 3. And you want to definitely reach out and talk to people, ask them if they're willing, and how they prefer to be contacted, and then you don't need to you can wait until you're asked for them. But one thing that's happening, as I discussed here on the next slide, is that typically references didn't used to be asked for until the very end of a process, but now over recent years, they pop up even on the initial application sometimes. So that's why we want it in your toolkit, why we want you to be prepared with that information. So, and it's generally good practice to let your references know once they've been asked for their information. Just give them the head up. If you're in a very active job search, and you're applying to lots of things, you don't have to tell them every single time. Just a single heads up would be to say, hey, I'm applying for a number of jobs. I've started to be asked for references. Just want to let you know you might get a call or an email. So, and then of course you always want to circle back, right? And then this final point, this is again, something that's cropped up in recent years. It's one of these bad employer practices that I wish we could change, but it doesn't seem to be going away, which is where a company or a hiring manager will become very insistent on talking to your current manager before they've made you an offer. And you want to negotiate this carefully because, for the most part, people, it's the norm not to let your manager know that you're looking. There can be negative consequences if your organization knows that you're actively looking for a job. And so I don't think it's fair for people to be asked about, but it does happen, and so you want to be careful. The main thing sometimes is to first say well, they're not aware that I'm searching, and I really would prefer to keep that information from them until I have a definite offer. But sometimes a company will give you what's called a contingent offer, where they make the declaration, yes, you are the one we want to hire, but we'd like to speak to your manager first. So still not ideal for you, but it can be a bit of a compromise there. So, okay. So let's talk about then launching a comprehensive job search. Right. And this is where they kind of, we separate things into what we call the open and the hidden market. Right. So open market is basically everything public facing, about a company, about possible jobs. Right. And, this has come under fire in, ever since the evolution of the digitalization of job postings. You'll hear a lot of articles say that nobody reads your resume. It's all robots. It's not worth, doing anything on the open market. But a lot of places still hire this way. I mean, Barnard's a good example. We've got a couple of openings here beyond Barnard, and we primarily, get our candidates by posting the job, advertising the job, and seeing who comes in and sort of, we do read them all. A human being reads all of the applications. And a lot of places still hire this way or hire in part this way. But that doesn't ignore the fact that it can be quite difficult. There are challenges to the digital marketplace for employing for jobs. And so one of the things we want to talk about, and we'll talk about throughout the series, is best practices to get your application out of that giant pile of applications, or the giant file, I guess, of applications, and into the smaller pile to be considered and hopefully invited for an interview. So all of which is not to say that the hidden market isn't important as well. And so technically this means jobs that either aren't posted yet or may not be posted. But the sort of informal definition of this is you find out about these through networking, and the networking piece is really crucial. And the idea is that, as we'll talk about, networking is a little bit fluky, but if you're consistently growing your network, consistently reaching out to people at places and in roles and at places that you might be interested in, then you'll be fresh in the minds of your contacts if you should see something open up at their organization, or if they find out about an opening, and we'll be able to possibly refer you. So there's a lot of facets to the open job market. I'm not going to go over each of these, but general categories. I've mentioned Handshake. It's our platform for making appointments and events, as well as job postings. And as I said before, is primarily, the majority. This is, it's a platform that's targeted at universities and graduate schools. So in general, there's a lot of emphasis on internships and then jobs for recent grads, but there are some, as we call, what they call more experienced hires, higher level things. So and Handshake is a general site in that it doesn't focus on any one kind of job. It's from across industries, and that's another big category. Just general job search sites, and the key there is to be focused, use your filters, use your profile to make sure that you are seeing and being sent jobs that make sense for you, and continuing to sort of adjust that. And then there's niche sites, and just gave a couple of examples there for particular fields. And then there's direct to the company. I mean, you obviously can't look at every company in the world, but I often work with people to help them create a sort of working list of 10 to 12 target places that they'd really like to work at, and then be sort of movable. A movable list, but that keeps it manageable, and that's where you're directly checking in on their sites. And you also could access, companies, find out information about them through their social media or in the media in general. See what other people are saying about them. And don't forget some of the, it's easy to forget some of the other ways to access companies, and opportunities through professional associations, conferences. There's I suppose conferences will start to become in person again soon, but there's been a lot of virtual activity over the last year and a half. Job fairs similarly have been virtual and might go back to being in person or hybrid. And then there's a lot of, trade journals, publications, and listservs are old-fashioned, but they're still around. These sort of date back to the early days of email. It's kind of a closed email, but it's an interesting thing to ask about people when you're networking with people in a field, to find out, are there any of these closed sort of email sharing of opportunities that you might be able to tap into. Okay. Some of the things you can do to strengthen your application, and again, we'll be amplifying a lot of these suggestions in our throughout the series. It's all about customizing, right? Which again can feel daunting and can feel time consuming, but we'll talk about how to make that manageable. And then doing some targeted networking as you apply to things. Sometimes people will do that before they officially apply if they can hear back quickly from a contact. Sometimes it's best to go ahead and officially apply in a timely manner and then circle out to people. There's a couple scripts there, different possibilities. Right. The idea there is to sort of give your application a little boost, a little bit more visibility. So again, single statement on the slide here. This is something that we talk to students a lot, as part of the education process, is that you can't just apply to things online. You do need to, broaden it and use networking and other tactics to both learn more for yourself and to get leads to things that aren't necessarily going to show up on a job board. So the other part of this is the hidden job market, right? And this gives you a list of various ways. I broadened out alumni. The Barnard network is very strong. We'll talk about that some more. But high school contacts, graduate school contacts are also part of your alumni, broader alumni network. Barnard Connect, if you're not familiar, is a mentoring platform that we launched 2 years ago. It's kind of like a LinkedIn just for Barnard. So students can opt in and alumni opt in, and they can make connections. And we just added the capability back in March, I believe, for alumni to alumni mentoring and contact. So similar to LinkedIn, you can search the community for a profession and field and positions and other things you might have in common. And there are also, we've established a few groups, interest groups within Barnard Connect. So at the end of the session, I'll put the direct link to that. But if you haven't signed up, that can be a great thing to sign up for. Again, your professional associations, many of which have groups on LinkedIn. And then, of course, LinkedIn, which remains the sort of dominant player in this field of professional networking. But don't forget, and this can be really important, your personal network of friends and families. Not everybody has to be in your profession to be helpful to you. And so again, having that script, being able to articulate what you're looking for, you never know when somebody you know, or I used to, in pre-COVID times, I would joke about your hairdresser, your bartender, and your dentist. That just, you never know, you have that sort of chit chat in all three of those situations, and they know a lot of people. So, as I said, networking can be fluky, but it flukes that work your way. So, I'm not going to go over each step of this, but just a couple of potential scripts here. And this again we'll go into more detail in the networking sessions, but I wanted to give a little bit to get you started on with some specific suggestions on how to reach out to people. And this just a note here as I try and sort of rush to the end, that, as you know, as I said at the beginning, the session's being recorded, and we can also share the slides with you as well. So you'll have a chance to come back to some of this. And this slide just talks a little bit about thinking about what you're trying to get out of a networking meeting, and having the right expectations. Really, what you're looking for, less than a job itself, is, and if you go in, you'll be thinking this, you'll be a lot more successful. Is to you are gathering information, right? Knowledge, you're gathering advice, you're getting the lay of the land initially, and then it might become more targeted. Every once in a while, you'll get lucky, and somebody you meet with will have a specific job lead or could connect you to somebody who's actually hiring. Again, as I mentioned at the outset, it's a hiring market at the moment with a lot of movement. So you might get a little bit more of those leads than would happen, say, a year ago. But at the very least, you want to come away with something else to do from that contact, another person to talk to, or another company, or someone to reach out to, so you can keep building and keep working on that network. This is something I don't think they made it. I don't think it comes directly from them, but we had some of our alumni who actually work at LinkedIn did a couple of webinars for us last summer, and this is one of the quotes we took away from that. As I think a true thing. If you go in looking for a job, asking for a job, most people aren't in the position to give you a job, and or will be turned off by being asked so directly without any kind of preliminary. But if you ask for advice, if you ask for their insight, that people are able to give, and that leads to, generally speaking, an intelligent, productive conversation, which positions you then for them to refer you for a job or to let you know about openings. So, okay, so we're moving our way through. A few words about tracking your progress. I've done this work for a while. I've worked with all sorts of personalities and personality types. And I know you're out there. As the second bullet, there are people who just love lists and calendars and color coding and spreadsheets. And if you are one of those people, go to town. Job search is a really good way of doing that, because you'll want to keep track of who you reached out to, and when did you submit the application, and what was the email address you sent it to, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're not that way, if you're not a naturally hyper organized person, you do still need a system. Just figure out something that's going to work for you. I remember sitting with an alum a number of years back who just had, a really nice journal, and literally everything was in that journal. Her notes, business cards, printouts of various things. And, it looked a little messy from the outside, but she knew where everything was. And similarly, I know people can, throw everything in a drawer or a file box. Just create something, because you don't want to be caught, wasting a bunch of time trying to track down stuff. If you get called for an interview, say 4 weeks after you applied for something, you want to be able to, get your hands on the job description and get yourself ready for that interview. So. And then, routines. I'll talk a little bit about that more in a moment, but, this is just one checklist. You can obviously vary this, but the idea is to set quotas for yourself or set a schedule for yourself. This could be every day, it could be once a week, whatever works for you. if you, so you could find and apply to 5 jobs in a single day, or you could apply to 1 job, each night, or maybe you don't want to be that quota oriented, and you'll just, at least look at job postings. And then you'll notice that I, give you a bunch of tasks under the LinkedIn checklist. You want to be spending equal time, not just looking at job postings and applying to them, but you want to be working on the networking side as well, and treating LinkedIn and Barnard Connect and your other networking outlets the same way you would the job postings. So, okay. So we're almost to the end. As I promised, we're going to pull back a little, talk about keeping perspective and making it manageable. So again, this is something I find myself saying a lot, trying to, and something I've, work on myself. How do you work with yourself, not against, right? So looking at your patterns, at your, your current situation. Some of you may be currently unemployed, and the challenge may be to structure that time. Others of you may be employed full-time or part-time, and the challenge is going to be how do you fit in job searching, which can be, both tedious and energy consuming. So so again, it's just, taking a look, are you a morning person who works well in small bursts? So then is there a way of, carving out 15 or 20 minutes in your morning routine to, to do a few things? Are you more, once you sit down, you get fully absorbed, in which case maybe you should be setting aside time on the weekends, like setting, calendaring for a chunk of time that you can work on this. So one of the things I found, that final bullet, it kind of comes out from one of my experiences. I worked part-time here at Beyond Barnard, formerly Career Development, for a while, and would find on the days that I wasn't working, it really helped me to schedule things that got me out of the house. So I often went for the 11 o'clock or the 12 o'clock appointment or task or errand, and that gave me some time in the morning to do some work or to do whatever else I needed to get done, but also got me up and out. So so again, thinking about what you can do to help give some structure to that. You want to be kind to yourself. I mean, we've all heard this message all for the last year and we all know how hard this has been in so many different ways. The experience of COVID and lockdowns and the economic impact and the impact on our home life and our work life. So, but even without all of that, looking for work is challenging. It can be really boring. And I think that middle bullet is probably my favorite. Periods of minimal results can be frustrating. There's a time in every job search, sometimes a long period of time where you are sending stuff out, whether it's networking requests or applications, and you're just not hearing back. And that can be really frustrating. And as mentioned at the top, it's also, especially in this, period of time, it's easy to feel alone or isolated. So, so you want to be kind to yourself. All of the stuff you've been hearing about self-care and, rest and breaking up, getting outside and doing other things that bring you, de-stress you, etc. You want to make sure that you do that more than ever when you're looking for a job. But I always recommend that you keep your search part-time, and because it'll drive you crazy. It's just, you work at it Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, you're gonna drive yourself nuts. You got to break it up a little bit. And again, to those of you who are trying to fit this in around work and everything else that you do, the routine is more important than the actual time spent. There's no requirement that you spend X amount of hours or apply to X many jobs. It's more trying to build it into your routine, making sure you're finding regular periods of time to do your work on this. And you definitely want to balance it out with other activities, and especially, I think this is especially important if you are unemployed and not working at the moment, thinking about volunteering, thinking about taking classes, etc., which actually brings us to the next slide, which is, it's, when you're unemployed or when you are, and or when you're looking is a good time to work on skill building. And we talked about this, we've talked about this a lot over the last year. So there's a ton of resources out there. YouTube's at the bottom because it's like the lowest hanging fruit. So if you need to brush up on Excel, you can type it into YouTube and you can do a million demonstrations and click repeat over and over again until you get the hang of doing the thing you need to know how to do on Excel. Obviously, beyond Barnard, we're here for not just the career support, but we offer a lot of different workshops and things as well. There's lots of other resources at Barnard, but I want to particularly shout out the Empirical Reasoning Center, which does a lot of training on data, which is one of the most in-demand skills. Doesn't mean everybody has to go out and be a data scientist or a data strategist, but being data literate, having some basic understanding of how pervasive the use of data is and how it is used to inform strategy can be really helpful. And then sort of moving up here, you know, some of these other more formal places, boot camps, academies, etc. And then there's a lot of online learning as well, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, etc. So generally speaking, you want to stay positive. And these are all suggestions on how to do that. I think that that quote at the bottom, you know, the how to think about this. I pose this question to a lot of people I work with, you know, a lot of alums that I work with on this, is to try and shift that mindset to, I have a lot to offer, who gets it? Who is the next person who's going to get, the next organization, the next team that's going to get my skills, my experience, instead of the more common mindset of, I've got to get someone to hire me. How can I get them to hire me? You're not going to be able to erase that latter part completely, but the more you can approach it from a, I've got value, I've got skills, I've got experience, where can I bring them? Where do I want to bring them? So, okay. But we'll be realistic. And again, you know, having worked with a lot of people over a number of years, you know, over these, you know, last few years that I've been doing this work, if you're not succeeding, right? If you're networking and you're sending out applications and you're not getting interviews, or if you are interviewing but you're not getting offers, then you need to take a look at what's happening, you know, and that's a good time to circle back to us, one of our advisors here, or an external career coach, to try some new things, you know, and you know, sort of take a little deeper dive into what you've been doing. So, okay, so just if you haven't seen the breakdown of what's coming up next, these are the next 7 weeks. And you've all been registered for the full series, and you'll get a reminder every Tuesday, I think late afternoon, early evening, but you don't have to come to every session. So for instance, I had a handful of people take this last summer who weren't job seeking, but they were actually looking to open their own business. And so they didn't do the whole resume cover letter thing, but they were interested in how to position themselves on LinkedIn and how to use networking techniques. You know, so absolutely feel free to come in and out. These are also all being recorded and you'll be able to access them afterwards. So, but those are the topics that are coming up. You, at any point during the series, if you would like to make an advising appointment, you can do that via Handshake. If you're on Handshake, if you're not, you're actually going to be added to Handshake through the registration list, and we can help you actually customize your account and familiarize yourself with how to do that. But if you want to skip all of that, if you're unfamiliar with Handshake or you don't think you're on it, you can email us at Beyond Barnard and let them know that you would like help making an appointment. No rush on that and no requirement on that. You do not need to follow up with us individually, but if you would like to, you can do it anytime during the series, or you could go through the whole series, get all the information, and then at that point be ready to talk to someone individually. So, so I'll stop here. There's my name again, there's my direct email, but please, if you do want an appointment, better to go through the general email so that more people can get that set up. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to open things up to questions. So I see that there are already a couple things. Will we get access to the recording if we can't attend at noon every week? Yes. So I'll double check, but I think Alumni Relations will be posting it on their site, and then we'll make it available as a follow-up. email. So, okay, and another question. Resources or tips specifically for international students seeking jobs in the US or other countries. So if you're currently, so we actually did a panel on this. So Manur, I'm going to shoot me an email and ask me this question, and I will share with you that resource, because that was a really interesting panel with alumni who had been international students themselves or were working international. So that was helpful. Let me just turn this play sound when someone joins or leaves. Okay, so want to leave space. If you would like to unmute and ask a question directly, feel free to do that. Or if anybody wants to add anything more to the chat, happy to answer any more questions. I know we're right up at 2 o'clock, so feel free to head out if you need to, but if you have a couple questions, happy to take them. In the meantime, I'll just say thank you to all of you for joining in and for putting up with the first few moments of a little Zoom confusion. And hope to see you next week or see you taking advantage of the recordings. But again, any questions, welcome to answer them. Yes, we will share the slide. So I think what we'll do is you'll get a follow-up email from us with a link to the recording and a PowerPoint of the, a PDF of the slides. So. Okay. And I've got a private message from a student. I'll follow up with that afterwards. Excellent. Anybody else? Comments, questions? Well, thank you so much. And I will see some of you next week.